Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Also this week, the world is waiting on President Biden's budget proposal for fiscal 2024. He is expected to announce it on Thursday, and it's worth pointing out that even when you have uniparty control in Washington, presidential budgets are generally greeted as dead on arrival because Congress has its own priorities. And here's a situation where you have a House in Republican hands, so maybe this Biden budget is double dead. But Kate, it's still useful as a measure of presidential priorities, and to the extent that the president can push members of his party in Congress on certain issues that are important to him, it can certainly change the debate, I think. So you're an experienced budget watcher in Washington. What are you looking for when Biden's budget comes out, and what do we know so far?
Yeah, Kyle, budget release is the high holidays for some of us, and we're expecting the president to get his out this week. We're starting to see some initial leaks on some of the highlights, one of which is Biden is flogging this plan that he says will save Medicare. In reality, from the high-level details that are available, it's really a large tax increase, and it would do so by increasing the Medicare surtax on investment income. And so what it aims to do there, it's 3.8% now. It aims to both broaden the base and reach its tentacles into other types of businesses that aren't currently subject to it, capture more income, and also raise the rate to 5%. Now, the president has long said that he doesn't want to raise taxes on anyone earning $400,000. So since it hits at around $250K for married people filing jointly, it looks like he'd have to create a new tax bracket and put a surcharge on a surcharge. This is a really large tax increase on capital gains. It was really what it is. You also, in this plan, basically, he wants to continue to broaden his scheme from the Inflation Reduction Act to price control new drugs and expand his tentacles into new classes of drugs and create more rules even in commercial markets on list prices and what can be charged for drugs. And then he says, we're going to use all of this money to save Medicare. First of all, it's early days, but the math on this looks completely out of proportion. And the Biden administration is also proposing some new lower costs for Medicare beneficiaries, which means, they're not really reforming how the program works. So I think this is mostly a political smokescreen here. But broadly on the rest of the budget, I think it's always a good check on whether the president has any new ideas. I think we're going to see a lot of the same kind of things rolled out. We want to spend more on tax credits for children or Head Start, be large domestic increases. I think we're going to see not even a commensurate for inflation increase in the Pentagon budget, a continuation there of our 3% of GDP spending that we've been at and climbing down on for some time. So I don't expect much here. And a lot of what we're seeing so far looks like warmed over ideas that they've been trying, particularly those price controls, just clawing in more drugs.
Let me pick up on the Medicare fact sheet that the White House has put out this morning. And as Kate says, this is a tax increase on earned and unearned income above $400,000 from 3.8% to 5%. And it notes that the most recent Medicare trustees report projects that the Hospital Insurance Trust Fund is going to go insolvent by 2028. So there is definitely some action needed on that. But Colin, I wonder if this is giving an opening for Republican candidates who want to attack this as a tax increase. And I would say pair it with what's probably coming on Social Security. The Social Security Trust Fund, if my memory serves right, that one is scheduled to go insolvent by something like 2034. And during the 2020 campaign, President Biden had another proposal. It would have applied the 12.4% Social Security tax, which is currently capped. It comes off at a certain amount of income. He would have applied that 12.4% to all income over $400,000 with no cap. And so you combine those figures. If President Biden is still going, I think certainly he can be held responsible for endorsing that in the 2020 campaign. But you get something like, an additional 13 or 14% tax on high earners. Colin, I can only imagine that would have some effect on incentives in the economy.
All right, for sure, Kyle. I mean, and yes, as you said, I think there is an opportunity for Republicans here. You talking about all of these various kinds of insolvency looming, and is anyone talking about cutting spending? We've got another soak the rich plan here from President Biden. Obviously, that's very popular with a progressive base. You know, he came into office being quite clear that he would raise taxes. Now he's ready to do it again. And of course, he says he's going to raise taxes on billionaires. And of course, he says he's not going to raise taxes on the middle class because, I mean, guess what? I mean, here's a great secret about American taxpayers. The vast majority of them consider themselves middle class, whether they are or not. So Biden says people making less than $400,000 a year aren't going to pay any more in income tax, fine, but there's a rather large gap between $400,000 and $1 billion. And plenty of the taxpayers in that gap are small business owners and people who create jobs in their communities. So I think this is certainly a good issue for Republicans to take on. And I think the American people instinctively understand, especially when you start dealing with big pieces like Medicare and Social Security, that once you take the basic guardrails off for what percentage people are paying and make those progressive taxes, that there's really no end to where that can go.
Kate, the other thing that strikes me as interesting about this plan by President Biden for Medicare is just that the debate in the GOP seems to be whether those entitlement programs, for political reasons, need to be ruled out for any changes. And I guess just to double down on what I was saying earlier, it seems like there's an opportunity for some Republican candidate here who can provide another option for how to keep those trust funds solvent. If the Biden plan is an enormous tax increase on small business owners and upstanding members of communities all across America who are earning good paychecks, granted, and the Republican plan is some sort of minor changes, you know, like raising the retirement age by a year in 2050, I am not so certain which of those plans would be more likely to be favored by the public. And Kate, we'll give you the last word.
Yeah, well, I first want to underscore Colin's point that there's no end to this. I mean, we would be looking under this plan at tax rates above 50% in states run by Democrats. And we're talking about going back to confiscatory tax rates. And the Obamacare surcharge was pitched as, well, it's just going to be this tiny little nick on people who are really rich. And the brackets were never indexed for inflation. So it continues to take in people lower and lower on the income scale. And again, now we're seeing they're just going to ratchet it up further to try to get more people into it and make the rate higher. So this is a real tax ratchet. And it's certainly not the end. Joe Biden would still like to raise corporate taxes at least to 28%. And there's even been discussion of things like taxing unrealized capital gains before you cash out. So this is the beginning, I think, of some really ferocious tax increases that we can expect. On the GOP, I just would quickly add, they've got a thin House majority. I think they need to spend some time being thoughtful on what changes they want to propose. I don't think that so far they've been able to add much substance on this front, and it's a risk right now to try to talk about this and voters end up scared because there's no real agreement on what the ideas are or how they're going to do it. I do think there's plenty of room for the proposal you described where you do something modest and over a long period of time. But they need to use this time in their thin majority to start to figure out what they plan to tell the country about this in 2024. Because just saying, no, we're not going to cut it like Joe Biden says, I don't think is a sufficient political argument.
Thank you, Kate and Colin. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.